Welcome everybody to another episode of the Live Your Purpose podcast. I'm your host, John Morgan Jr. Before we get into who our special guest is for today, allow me to just say thank you to everybody who has been supporting the podcast, who's been supporting our mission, everybody who's been supporting the merch and the apparel. We really appreciate that. As I say, every time we get on this thing, I never take it for granted. I never take it for granted the amount of support, because first and foremost, to me, it's been genuine and it's been a lot of love and it's been a lot of positivity. So I just appreciate that. So I don't take that for granted. And I want to just say thank you to everybody who has been supporting the podcast and, you know, what we have going on. For those who do not know, the Live Your Purpose podcast is a space where we want to highlight entrepreneurs, creators, other individuals, you know, Black creators and Black individuals for sure. Where we can, you know, talk about their backstories and just be able to highlight them. You know, we want to have fruitful conversations that are ultimately able to lift the consciousness of people. That's what we're here for. We're here to serve. We never want to be shy about that at all. So for those who are just now joining us, welcome. And without further ado, you know, I want to introduce who we have on the pod with us today. We have Miss Rachel Cargle. She is a writer, an activist, a philanthropist, a public academic, a lecturer, and an entrepreneur. Rachel, thank you so much for coming on. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be in conversation with Akron.
Yeah, for sure. Listen, I fuck with you, Rachel. I do it. I'm gonna tell you a few reasons why I do. Like you just said, first and foremost, you know, this is hometown. You know, you from the city. You know what I'm saying? So that's first and foremost. Secondly, you are an action taker and you are very intentional, and I value that. I appreciate that. The next reason is you are a Sagittarius, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
I'm a Sagittarius.
Likewise, same here. And the last reason is you be talking that shit to white folks, and I love it, and I appreciate that. I mean, you do it in such a, you know, an eloquent way, but it is so gentle, but yet so fierce, and I just appreciate what you bring, and I love it. You know, my wife and I were talking about you yesterday, and she was like, "Listen, she's one of my favorite people."
Oh, thank you.
So I just appreciate you. And I want you to know that. So
thank you so much. I appreciate all of those words and all of those specific things that you called out. I think are some of my favorite things about myself as well. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's jump into it a little bit. You are originally from Akron. Just like myself. Now you moved around a little bit, but like when you reflect back on your time just growing up here in the Midwest, in this small city. Now, for the masses, Akron is much more known now,
yeah,
you know, than ever before. But when you just reflect back to your childhood and just like growing up here in the city, like what are some of your earliest memories that you can kind of like resonate with?
Well, you know, the home that I grew up in, my childhood home was in Greene. Okay. And not far from like South Arlington area. And so, but most of my time in Akron was like church. And I ended up going to Hoban. So I would be there for school, and summer camp was at the University of Akron. And so for me, a lot of my interactions with being on the ground in Akron was in a social sense, because I was always in Greene, surrounded by whiteness when I was in school and in my neighborhood. And so driving up the highway and getting to go into Akron was always so exciting and exhilarating for me, because it was my chance to be around family, to be around other Black people, to do things that felt, you know, like I knew that I would run into a barbecue somewhere, or I knew that a basketball game would be happening that I could like be with friends and watch. So for me, when I think of Akron, I think of so many good things, because it was always my kind of space to, I don't want to say escape to, but my space to go to and really feel grounded when I was younger. And I just have so many memories. And it's weird because I think of my memories in streets. I think of Copley, I think of Arlington, I think of Waterloo, I think of, you know, like East Avenue when I think of memories. So yeah, I think of Akron very warmly. which is different because I was so ready to leave. I was so ready to escape. And when I've been able to come back kind of as an adult, and by leave and escape, I'm saying the small townness of it, the Midwest of it, the wanting to be on a coast and what's happening in these big cities. And Akron always felt so far away from what I felt was the action of the world, or were people who I knew I wanted to live a certain way, and it never felt like Akron would be able to offer that to me in my mind at the time. So yeah, coming back has been a really beautiful unraveling experience to step into Akron as an adult with different perspective and different lens. And it's nice to have this full circle moment of being there again and again, taking it in warmly, and again, realizing that, you know, there is goodness there, even if it's not Brooklyn or NYC.
Yeah. Do you think you'll be able to have that perspective without traveling outside of here and actually living outside of the city?
You know what? I'm a pretty good daydreamer. I'm a pretty vivid like I can imagine things deeply vividly. I can't even, the thought of me having stayed in Akron isn't even a possibility in my realm of thought. And so I can both say, yes, I wouldn't have had this perspective if I hadn't have left, but also I couldn't have not left. Like it wouldn't have, my body wouldn't have let me stay.
I am laughing so hard because like I literally feel you. Like this really, like I am resonate with everything you're saying. I mean, listen, for me, I had the luxury of just being able to travel a lot early, through like sports and family reunions and things like that. So like early on, I knew that there was so much more out there than this city. And as I continue to grow into an adult, like traveling was just a thing that just had to happen no matter what. So
that's such a privilege. I didn't have that when I was younger. I had no clue what else was out there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's as an adult, like I'm able to see the goodness in Akron. Like there are special things about this small town that like I'm just not going to get, like you said, on a coast or just in a bigger city. You know, a place where it is just so much going on. Now that I'm an adult and I have a family, like I appreciate the city so much more. But with that being said, me and my family are leaving, you know, so I get it completely.
I think both of those feelings can exist at the same time. It can be this is a place of nostalgia. This is a place that made me. This is a place that, like, you know, like I said, the feeling of, there's a particular feeling on my skin when I think about spring in San Run. Like I will never ever be able to feel that way anywhere else. And I can love and appreciate that. And I also can realize that, you know, existing in this space has given me a lot of tools and a lot of resources to explore what else is possible. And I give myself that duality.
Yeah, 100%. Both things can be true. 100%. Listen, we're coming off a historical year. You know, a year that'll be unforgettable. I mean, you know, even when I talk to my elders, you know, my grandparents, people who have lived much longer than you and I have, even they could say, listen, I'll never remember a year like 2020. And I know for myself, I learned so much about myself. What did you specifically learn about yourself spiritually, mentally, emotionally? What you learned about yourself in 2020?
I learned a few things. One of the biggest things is I had a huge career shift. My career exploded in 2020, particularly because a lot of the work that I had been doing for the last few years became intensively relevant to what was happening, particularly around the protest, particularly around the conversation of whiteness and its direct impact on the ways that we exist in this country. And so it was a very interesting space where it felt like everything was overnight when in fact it wasn't, because it was years and years of work that happened to, it was like I got to open a vault of all the work I had been doing, and it was all of a sudden incredibly relevant. And so I had a huge career shift that changed my perspective on rest, that changed my perspective on access. And we can get into more of that later when we talk about career. But the other thing specifically that this has taught me, thinking about quarantine and thinking about, you know, we're all so separate. And I have a place here in Brooklyn and in Akron, and I decided to come back to my Brooklyn space. And I just deeply love the solitude. I deeply love being here on my own with time to read and time to think and time to dance by myself and know myself, and, you know, just talk to the people I want to be talking to instead of the people who I happen to run into at, you know, a restaurant or wherever we are when we're running around in the world and not really paying attention to how we're spending our time. So I definitely have leaned into a deep, deep value of mine that I didn't even know was there, which is solitude.
That's very powerful. How did you cope with like that massive career change and like this massive amount of just like eyes on you and just like just an overwhelming amount of just like, because when you said that, when I thought about that, it made me think of like an artist, somebody who has just been slowly but surely just working, you know, working the underground scene, and all of a sudden they have a big record, and next thing you know, they're just catapulted into superstardom. That's what I thought about when you said that. So like, how did you cope with that?
Yeah, I feel like it was probably somewhat similar to that. My career has been like slowly building in terms of recognition of my name or my work, but you know, how I coped with it had a lot to do with how I had envisioned my career a long time ago. I have notebooks from 2013 when I first moved to New York and I was first kind of studying entrepreneurship, and I was deeply interested in it. And I spent a lot of time studying Oprah and her company structure in particular. And I always am studying Beyonce, how she moves through the world, how she makes entrepreneurial decisions. I love her music also, but I deeply, deeply love her as an entrepreneur. And so I have notes from way back in 2012, 2013 of me kind of sketching out, if I had a company, this is how I would want it to look. This is how I would want it to feel. And this is how I want to exist in the world. And right. And so I had envisioned it, and I thought about it, and I talked about it, and I drew it out in a million different ways, thinking about how I want it to look and feel. And what that meant was, as I slowly progressed towards my own versions of success, I was slowly building into that. So what that looked like was, you know, me at the top as a CEO, and then me having a C-suite of employees. So my operations officer, my executive officer, my tech officer, my finance officer, and then underneath that, I wanted to have various companies, and those companies to have their own CEO, but then my C-suite to be managing everything and just reporting to me. So I was kind of between 2012, when I got divorced and moved, to 2020, I was slowly filling in those spots. I was meeting people and I was mentioning, oh, one day I'm going to have a company and I'm going to need a CEO or a tech officer, and I dream of it being you. Or, hey, I would love to offer you a full-time position one day, but can you do this one project for me? And here's how much I can pay. Can we barter? So I was constantly building these relationships towards this business model that I dreamed of. So then as soon as 2020 hit, and I all of a sudden had the resources to bring people on, I kind of had already been dreaming my way through this space. And this year, I mean, as of now, this wasn't the case in February of 2020. But the case now is I have 6 full-time employees, and they're all filling in those spaces that I had been dreaming of back in 2013, because I had been building those relationships with my mind saying, one day this will all fit into this particular plan that I've been dreaming of. So how I dealt with the skyrocketing of my career is that I was wildly ready for it, because I literally, the second everything came in, I signed 6 people on full time. Everyone got health benefits. I was able to tell them, I had already opened, I said, okay, so now what businesses do I want? I want to open my bookstore. I want to have my learning platform. I want to do this and that. And that is how I was able to deal with it, because I had been planning for not necessarily this. And one of the hardest things about this is to consider that so much of my career success is within the crux of Black violence and a lot of our survival. But I've been able to continuously build things that are in honor of, in service of the Black community. So I find a lot of pride in that. But yeah, the way that I dealt with it is that I had prepared for it.
Yeah, when opportunity, meets preparation, that is wildly beautiful. But it took you a little bit of time. It took you some time. Like, what, when you look back on the time period that it took you, like, are you grateful for that time period, or would you wish that it would have happened a little bit differently? Like, what is your overall worldview on the amount of time that it took?
I often say that a lot of my spirituality is being grateful to my younger self and praying to my older self. And my younger self hustled her ass off when she got to New York. Like, I am seriously astounded by how many networking things I went to, by how many projects I took on, by how many jobs I was working. Like me right now, 32-year-old Rachel would never have that energy or that drive or that motivation. And I am just so astounded by the way that me 5 years ago came to New York City, like hit the ground, like I was hit the ground running personified. Like, I got here, I went to meetings, I walked into office, I cold called people, I took any job that was available, and I just can't believe it. So I can't believe that I had that type of energy. And in that deep appreciation for my younger self, I wouldn't have changed anything, because all of those things have poured into my understanding of myself. Everything, like, there's a salon that's now down the street from where I live, and I had gotten my hair done there, and she asked me to do, and I had like probably 300,000 followers at the time. And she's like, "Oh, Rachel, could I hire you to do my social media for this big event that we have?" And I was like, "Oh, okay, I'll do it." And I like completely volunteered. It was an exchange. She would flat iron my hair for free if I would do her social media for her. So these are the types of like exchanges I was doing for opportunities to be in rooms with particular people. And I did it, and I ended up being at like the after party of the event, and I met some of the most critical people in my career who I'm still friends with, who I'm still collaborating with years later. And even that salon where I still go to get my hair done for free, she's launching something, and I'm investing in something she's doing. And so just it didn't take that long kind of for me moving to New York to that kicking off point, but the work that I put in to be available, to be open, to be of service, to be willing to learn, to be willing to be embarrassed, to be willing to look stupid, to be willing to, ask questions and get into rooms. I think all of that was worth it, because it also fortifies me now. Like, okay, Rachel, if you could get through, being a nanny and working 2 jobs and doing XYZ, you can like finish this fucking book. Like, pushing myself based on what I understood that I'm capable of.
Yeah. That you knew the value of not only relationships, but utilizing the barter system, like you spoke on, and just like doing the damn work. Like, what I'm saying? We can never underestimate the power of just working.
But people do. If I told you how many DMs a day I get from people saying, "Rachel, how do I become a writer and have a career like yours?" You have to write. Like, you have to write, and then or even brands who say, or even writers, or anyone who says, "Rachel, hey, I'm starting this thing. Can you share it? Because I don't have as many followers as you." I too was in that place that you are in, and how this looks is that you build it. I would have loved someone with 2 million followers to just share my work and make it easy, but that's not how. You need to build relationships. You need to build a voice. You need to build trusted readers who trust you. And people don't value the process, and the process is really what fortifies us for us to even have success in the long run. Like, sure, I'll share your post if you want a short 15 minutes of fame where people are seeing your work and then they don't know who you are, they don't know your story, they don't value your vulnerability, but maybe that's what some people want.
Yeah, I mean, we know we live in a society where instant gratification is just, that is what is romanticized, you know what I'm saying? But like you said, I mean, when we're talking about quality over quantity, these are just the things that nobody can skip. Who were some of your early influences, just entrepreneurship or just creators?
I really love to study brands and how the back end looked and things like that. So brands that ended up getting cult followings, like the Dry Bar, like Glacier, like just some of these bigger brands that had built really dope stories. That's the standard now for marketing, but it wasn't back then when they were starting. And I loved just studying and seeing what people's stories were. Before I answer that question, I also want to tell a story really quickly, because I think it would resonate particularly with people in Akron, because that's the first thing I thought. And I'm writing about it in my book right now. And it was such a changing moment for me that shifted who I look to as inspiration. And I was reading Issa Rae's book. Maybe it's just called Awkward Black Girl. I don't remember, but her first book that she put out, the yellow one. And I was reading it because I really looked up to Issa, and I still do. I think she's absolutely wonderful. And I was reading through the book, but then I saw that her parents were both from Africa, and that she would go to Africa for like summer vacation, and her dad was a doctor. And I remember as I was reading it, like in the pit of my stomach, I was like, oh, wait, we're not the same. I thought we were kind of the same. And I thought maybe she could be some reflection of what was possible for me. But like, I grew up in Section 8 housing in Green, Ohio, and my mom is on disability. Like, we aren't the same. Right. So I started to really, I literally had a panic attack that day reading that chapter about her family, because I felt that I was slowly losing options for relatable inspirations, and people who literally made it, were self-made, who didn't have a father who had enough money to put you in this film program. People who, I think about Yara Shahidi, and like, okay, Nas is her cousin, and so she had access to a few things. She's absolutely dope, and she absolutely is meaningful, but she had access off the start that I wouldn't have had. And so I had this existential crisis probably 2 years ago of thinking that maybe I was delusional for thinking that I could get success, because even the people who I thought were like me were not. And so I lost a lot of hope in who my inspirations were over time, because I started to really get into people's background. Like, is she an inspiration, or did she just have access and now she's looking like a regular Black girl from a small town who made it? So yeah, a lot of my early inspirations are brands. I was emotionally traumatized, and I tried to really study brands instead of study people.
Well, who sparked that in your mind? I mean, again, we coming from a small city where the automotive industry is the economic foundation of where we are. So like, who there had to be somebody in your life, or somebody that you were connected to, that you at least was able to like see even before you even were able to see brands. It had to be somebody, right?
Going all the way back to people who I thought were so cool and so interesting and gave me thought. And I haven't even said, this is so funny, I haven't even thought about like back to make me think like, maybe I should go to like New York. Maybe I should like see what else. Shayla Somerville, I thought she was and I still do, thought she was like the most interesting, cosmopolitan, like moving through the world person ever. And I think seeing her and listening to her, a lot of the people who went off to, the people who were older than us, who went off to college and they came back and they were telling us stories about all of these other things. I think that watching particularly Black women in Akron who went places and came back and told their stories, that was really big for me.
Yeah. No, that's huge. That is extremely huge. I mean, again, for me, I think number one, I didn't really have early entrepreneur, people to kind of look towards. I didn't even know the value of entrepreneurship as a young person. That came a lot later for me. Again, for me, my foundation and my basis was so much sports related. That was my self-preservation, a way of looking to get out, so to speak, or looking to do anything. It was sports for me. I didn't even understand the value of entrepreneurship until I got into my early 20s when I read Rich Dad Poor Dad.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, entrepreneur, I guess I assumed your question might have been more in career, like what might have motivated me in career. In entrepreneurship in specific, what motivated me was that I had been married to a man who made a good amount of money than I decided I didn't want to be married anymore. And I moved out, and he was making all the money. And I was like, wait, now not wait, but I was excited to explore the ways that I could make my own money. And what did it mean for me to have my own finances? And what motivated me was my deep curiosity in my ability to make my own money.
Yeah. Yeah. That is a fearlessness that a lot of people don't have. Like the curiosity, the being to be able to tap into that curiosity and like attack it. Like I said from the beginning, man, you are an action taker. You know, where does that fearlessness come from?
I don't know. I am very fearless. Like my mother was probably very worried about me for a large chunk of my life because I was always taking risk and always just doing whatever I wanted. Mm-hmm. And I think two things is, one, I trust my gut. Like I truly trust myself.
Yeah.
So I trust my gut in making decisions. But the other thing is, I trust in my ability to show up for whatever comes before me. Mm-hmm. So when I make a decision like, should I leave this marriage? Should I move to New York with no apartment or no job? Should I travel the world with $200 in my bank account, which are all decisions I've made? These are, my approach is, okay, Rachel, if you move to New York, do you think that you'll be able to succeed? Do you actually believe that you have the genius to navigate this big fucking city and put your way into industries and show up and be able to do something? Yes, I do believe that. The next question is, Rachel, do you believe that if you completely fail, you'll have the wherewithal to work at McDonald's and, have 4 roommates and wake up early mornings to catch the train until you figure out what to do next? Yes, I also believe that I have that wherewithal. Great. So I'm going to make the decision with my gut, and regardless of how this goes, I'll be fine. So it's really, I trust my genius, I trust my work ethic, and I trust my creativity that if this doesn't work the way I want it to, I can come up with something new. I believe I could have been successful as a real estate agent. I believe I could have been successful as a sports analyst. I believe I could have been successful in several things, but this is what I want to be doing. And so this is where I'm putting my creativity and my genius and my interest.
You simplify it.
Yeah.
Simplify it. Yeah. That's that Sagittarius that I was talking about. That's what I'm talking about. I know exactly what you mean though. I resonate with that. I mean, that's one thing that I can definitely look back on my life when it comes down to like making decisions. I've always been able to like simplify it, even when somebody else can have all these different excuses or whatever the case may be.
Yes.
I'm able to look within my own being, look within myself and say, you know what? I don't give a damn about what's going on. I'm going to roll this way, and you catch me down the road.
I'll see whatever happens. I'll figure it out.
Yeah. That's a fact. Listen, talk to me a little bit about your experience of being at Hoban. For those who do not know, Hoban is a private school, predominantly white institution. I went to school in Copley, predominantly white school as well, in a suburb outside of Akron. And again, when I was in it, my experience in Copley was cool. I played sports. I got along with a lot of people. It was cool. I didn't really have a bad experience. But at the same time, I had experiences of a real world that I knew a lot of the people that I went to school with had no goddamn idea about. You know what I'm saying? And I know in recent years, like you've had some shit to say about Hoban not supporting, its Black students specifically. Like, but what was your experience like being in that institution as a teenager?
Hoban was very unmemorable for me now. I don't necessarily think back to it deeply fondly. I think back to the friends. I mean, that was my first time in a school setting where I really could connect with and build really meaningful bonds with other Black women, in particular, Black girls at the time. I didn't really have a lot of Black girls in my school and my spaces. So I made some of the most significant connections with Black girls and women that have maintained in my life. And that was super important to me. But at the same time, I didn't have the language, and Hoban's so lucky that I didn't, but I didn't have the language and I didn't have the insight for the things that I would have said now for the conversation that would have happened then. And it's really funny because I used to get in trouble all the time. I'm just thinking about, I used to play for the tennis team and they would match us with doubles, and the coach would match me with his like daughter who was super bad. And like, why are you mad? I just would get so upset that he would match me with her. And I remember one day I made the tennis team protest with me, and like, we would not get off the bus until he gave me a adequate reason for why he would be matching me with her. And it's just so funny to think that I had that like self-determination around something as silly as who I was doubles partners with in tennis. And if only I had the language for the types of conversations that I have now around race and privilege and class, because that's absolutely what I would have been spending my time talking about and protesting at not the university, at Hoban, where they're still existing in ways that are beneficial to their white students. That's what they center their money on. That's what they center their efforts on. And I mean, Hoban is a typical white institution, and they only move when they feel threatened. And that's when, I post something and who knows how many eyes could have a negative impact on their name and their brand. And other people like Paige Benson, who's doing a lot of really meaningful work there with the Black students, one-on-one in conversation, sitting in rooms with them, asking them what they need, planning events with them. And that type of support is necessary because Hoban also gave me a wonderful education. And that's the shitty part of it, that we have to choose between, do we want our children in a school district that might not have all of the funds necessary to give our children XYZ, or do we send them to a private school where they might have these emotional scars from the ways that white institutions treat them? So I'm happy to be back in Akron and kind of be more on the ground for these conversations that are happening across the board, but also at Hoban in particular, which has a lot of work to do.
So when you reflect on your experiences there and the impact of the racism that you experienced, again, like you just stated, you now have the language now. How do you resonate with that experience? Like, how do you look at that experience as it relates to like what you're doing today?
I honestly don't think about it much. I don't even remember, like, I don't even remember the day to day of Hoban. And maybe that's a trauma response. Like maybe I was going through something and I was blocking it out of my memory, but I don't think about it much. And maybe also because so much of because I was coming from Green, because I wasn't always in Black spaces, so much of my time at Hoban was in the joy of Blackness. It wasn't necessarily, I was experiencing I went to Green. I was experiencing whiteness for a very long time. So this shift was actually more of joy to me, more of like code switching with my girlfriends, or going, being in Akron. So like going to games after school that weren't at Hoban, going to Bookville, going to whatever local or closer school was having a game, being in romantic relationships with Black men, like that I never had a chance to be because I was in these all white spaces. And I would have never dated a white person. So there's like so for me, when I think of Hoban, yes, I probably absolutely was experiencing a million microaggressions a day. There probably was rapid racism happening all around me, but I was just so excited to be in a space to indulge more in the Black experience with my friends that's what I remember much more than whatever Hoban was doing.
So the innocence, and even just like the love that you were experiencing, I guess it kind of just kept you maybe sheltered in a way. In your,
I think it just overrode. It overrode the things that might have been happening, and also maybe since I was coming from Green, these things were normal for me. Whatever, it wasn't like I was shocked into, oh my gosh, I'm at an all-white institution and all of a sudden these are happening. That was my norm. The shock was the joy that I had with my Black girlfriends. The joy was like the experience of being seen and understood by people around me that I never had an opportunity to feel that way before. So I think it just overrode it.
Yeah. Now, one of the reasons that I asked that question is because, I mean, you ultimately did go to, Columbia, and you ended up leaving just due to the experiences of racism that you noticed on the campus. Now, I would imagine just as you got a little bit older and you became a little bit more aware, your consciousness grew. Maybe at that point it was just a little bit too much, and it was just unbearable at that point in time. Is that kind of how you look at it?
Yeah. So what happened at Columbia? Well, there's two things that have to be stated before we can even talk about that. The first is that by the time I got to Columbia, my career was really picking up. Like I was getting published with Harper's Bazaar. I was lecturing across the country, and things had really shifted for me. So my approach to the university was a little bit different in the sense that, you know, when you go to school, and I'm sure everyone can relate to this, when you're first in college, and also me being, how old was I? 29. So I was in my late 20s. So that also was a different approach. Than being fresh out of high school. But you know, when we're getting there, it's like this anxiety, like, okay, I have to do well because this is going to lead to my career and I have to do X, Y, Z. And it was just, if it had been right out of high school, then I probably would have been too focused to really be noticing what else was going around on campus, because I would have wanted a career. I would have wanted to do well. This time I also wanted to do well, but this was more of a refining opportunity for me to take classes to refine the work that I was already doing, for me to learn some new things that weren't necessarily critical to my career, but they were of interest to me. So that gave me kind of some breathing room to be looking around and being more critical with my professors and feeling, you know, for me, if I was to come up against Columbia and say, you're doing this, this, and that, and here are my demands, if they want to go against me, it's not going to have a bearing on, you know, a job isn't going to ask me, why did you leave Columbia? And them call in Columbia, be like, Rachel did X, Y, Z. So I had a little more space to be risky with how I was approaching this. So I just wanted to preface that, because I know a lot of people ask me about Columbia and they want to know maybe if it applies to how they want to exist in the university world. And so I have to speak to those privileges before I even go into that. But so I was there on campus and I was seeing a lot of things that were happening. People were kissing my ass basically a lot on campus because of who I was at that point. They were interested in what are your thoughts on this and what's your next writing piece. And so I personally wasn't experiencing a lot of what I would have experienced had I not been in that particular career space. But I had kind of the space to be looking around and seeing what was happening. And I was seeing what was happening to several other people, whether it was big things that were coming in the news or smaller things where I was seeing how professors were talking to someone, or I was reading through the professor's syllabus, like none of this makes sense that these are the experts that you're expecting us to learn from. So it was a big, it was a big point of being critical for me. But the biggest thing, I was paying money out of pocket. I'm not about to pay you, you know, $10,000 a semester for you to be putting me and other people at risk. And so with my experience with Columbia, I personally didn't experience a lot of things personally happening to me. There's the systemic things that are obviously glaring, but it was when I could no longer stomach the way they were treating other Black people. It wasn't okay, put my head down and keep going till I survive. It was like, there's no reason that it wouldn't be me next. Like, I'm not some like special Black person who people won't be racist against, or, you know, actually hurt and physically do something to. So I decided to leave because I refuse to put money and pay an institution that treats people like that. If that's what they're paying professors to do this, they're paying security guards to do X, Y, Z with my tuition. And it could have been me next, and it just wasn't worth me staying in that space.
Where did your love of just being intentional and the love of Black people come from? Where did that originate from?
I guess when I was born, being a Black woman, being a Black person, and you know what, I'll also say that, especially growing up in Green, it wasn't always a love. I definitely went through the stages of internalized anti-Blackness of, you know, I would be prettier if I was white, or like I would have, you know, thinking of what whiteness could have done for me if I wasn't Black. And I dealt with that a lot when I was a child, growing up in Green, coming into Akron for various things, and having to go back and be in these white spaces. Things were kind of glaring to me, and they really affected me a lot. And I think that it probably had to do with, once I got out of Green, once I got out of these predominantly white spaces, I noticed how, and it speaks to Hoban, how much joy I had when I was around more Blackness, how much ease I had when I was around more Blackness. And that natural goodness is like sacred. Like it's a goodness where I can be in a space with Black people and just feel safer and just feel more understood, or just feel more connected for one reason or another. And yeah, and traveling, and I wonder if it's the same for you. Traveling exposed me to the many different ways of being Black. My only understanding in my mind was either you were white or you were how Black people in Akron exist, because that's all I knew, or how Black people on TV exist, or how Black people in a movie exist. And one of the biggest things that changed my life was moving to DC, traveling to Miami, Portland, Santa Barbara, going to all these places and seeing the depths of how Black people exist in the world, really grew my love, I think.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I again, before I even went to Copley, like I was in the city of Akron. But my mother kept me in pretty decent schools. Like I went to Chapel Hill Christian School. I went to a private.
I went to Chapel Hill Christian School. I went to the North School though. I was up in Green.
So did I. The one right next to Chapel Hill Mall.
No, I'm sorry. Then the South School.
Okay,
I went to South.
So you went to the one in Green, right? Okay, that makes sense. Okay, that makes sense. So you are. I'm able to paint the picture of what Chapel Hill was.
But even that's a white. As many Black kids as there, that's a very white institution.
So that's what I was going into. Like, so for the majority of like my life, like I was around white people. Like a lot of times, Black you'll hear Black people say, "Listen, I didn't get around my first Black folks until I was in college," or it was a culture shock when I got my first job and I was around all these white people. That was not my experience. I was around white folks early. From a young age, and just being socialized early in the 90s. Like for the most part, I think even subconsciously, I had the idea that white people were superior. That white people had a lifestyle that Black folk that I just did not have. When I would go to like my white friend's house at Chapel Hill, dad was a doctor, mom was a RN. They lived in this wonderful house outside of the falls. Multiple bathrooms. They had a pantry with snacks in it. I'm like, this is not what I'm going back home to. You know what I'm saying? But I think that my family, specifically my parents, my mother specifically, they were very intentional about letting me know, like, listen, we know that we putting you in this quote unquote good school or whatever, that have a better education, but like, them folks ain't no better than you. And listen, not only are they not better than you, but like, you are very much divine in what you have. But it still didn't really like hit until I just began to have my own experiences, just like the beauty of Black people, and really understand the divinity in what we have. So it took me some time for sure.
Yeah, I had that same experience of my mom. That's why my mom was very intentional about like our church being in the city, sending me to summer camps in the city, everything else. What church?
Yeah.
I was at Antioch Baptist over on Vernon Odom Boulevard now.
On the west side. Okay.
But yeah, and like I would spend my weekends visiting with family in Akron, because she wanted to make sure that I saw those differences, but she also would make it very clear about why we were living in Green and why she put me in those schools to say, and she would do, my mom would do she would like put me in horse riding camp for the 3 days that she could afford. She would put me in golf camp for the 2 days that she could afford. Or if one of the moms in my Girl Scout troop would say, hey, our daughter would like us to bring Rachel on vacation with us, my mom would always say yes, because she knew she couldn't take me on vacation. Mm-hmm. So my mother, in sending me to Green and in putting me in various things, she always made it clear that this is an option for you too. Though you might not be able to go to horse camp all summer, this is something that you have seen and you've done, and you could say, oh yeah, I've ridden a horse before, or oh yeah, I can play golf if necessary. Oh yeah, I can do XYZ. She always gave me like a taste, so that I had at least a palate for things, even if I didn't have the access to buy it.
Yeah, exposure. That is so valuable. Where did your love of writing come?
My love of writing comes from my skill of writing. I don't necessarily love writing. It's just easy for me. Like it's it's not work
That's
for me.
that Sagittarius coming out again. I love it. I love it. Talk it.
I don't think writing is I like it because I'm good at it. And I've been told I was good at writing. I can remember in kindergarten being praised for my writing. And so maybe it was the praise that made me continue to pour into this skill.
Yeah.
But yeah, writing is so easeful to me, and I'm so grateful that I get paid to do the thing that is easiest for me. And it's so funny, I to the point where I actually feel self-conscious about it. There's so many times where I'll, one of the most viral things that I've ever written was for Harper's Bazaar, and it's a piece called White Feminism is Just White Supremacy in Heels, and it got so much praise, and it really went viral. And I have professors all the time sending me saying that it's part of their syllabus. And I remember literally sitting down and writing that in maybe 40 minutes and thinking like, okay, I'll do this and this, I'll add this and this and that. And then it got all, and I was like, oh my gosh, I wish I would have spent more time. Like what would it be if I would have spent 3 days revising and all these other things. And so I'm super grateful that one of the things that comes most naturally and most easeful for me is also the thing that I'm able to build my life around.
Yeah, you just touched on it. White feminism. I actually read that. But like expound on that. What is white feminism? One of the things you talked about also, you said, is that the idea of feminism did not take into account your Blackness. So like expound on that a little bit.
Well, I think that what it looked like for me and how I got into this conversation is that when I moved to New York City, I was very much invested in the feminist movement and learning about feminism. It definitely was never a conversation that I ever had while I was living in Akron. It came on my radar when I moved to DC, but then once I moved to New York, I was actually getting involved with organizations and, being very vocal about feminism. And I still absolutely identify as a feminist. And it wasn't until I had a photo go viral in which a lot of Black people challenged me and were like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, why are you a part of this? Why would you even trust these people? Aren't you aware of XYZ? And I was like, no, I'm not aware of XYZ. And so it sent me into this whirlwind of considering, what is this intersection of my race and my feminism? Like, what do I have to be considerate? What do I have to be considerate of? And what do I need to be critical of?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Who was the picture with?
It was me and a white friend of mine. Her name's Dana. Okay. She's someone who I had done some organizing work and education work here. And we took a busload of people to DC for the Women's March in 2017. So it was a photo of Dana and I that day at the Women's March. And anyways, it just sent me into this whirlwind of taking into consideration, what does my Blackness have to do with my feminism? And as I did my own study and as I learned more, I realized there was so much contradiction. There was so much oppression. There was so much irrationality that was in that intersection. And I decided that in order for me to be safe, in order for me to be rational, I needed to focus my passion and my work on that consideration of my race and my womanhood. And that's how I kind of got into the conversation. And really my public facing work has simply been me learning out loud. I didn't study any of this stuff before. I don't have any degrees. I've never graduated with any degrees. So I'm not at all an expert in this conversation, but I was writing, and I was writing out loud as I was learning, and I was being critical of what I was learning, and I was being critical of the people around me. And that's kind of how I got pushed into this particular conversation.
I want to ask you a question that I asked my wife last night.
Okay.
I asked her, I said, how can we as Black men, how can we be supportive of Black women in the movement of feminism? How can we be intentional and be supportive in that movement?
Well, I'll turn that question back to you. And my question for you is, if a white man was to come to you and say, if someone with more power within this structure and more privilege within this structure came to you and said, how can I support you in what you're fighting for your own equality, what types of things would you say?
The first thing I would say is I would I would speak to the people who, who it is impacting. I would, speak to the people that I have relationships with. That's the first thing that I would do. I would, speak to the people who it is impacting and who I have relationships with, and I would listen. I would shut the fuck up and listen. And I think from there, I would have a lot of the answers to what it is that I was looking to do.
Yeah, I think this is a question that I get all the time. Like, whether it's from white women saying, how can we support Black women, or from Black men saying, how can we support women? Mm-hmm. And I think that's such a wild question, because we all are in positions where we are the group that isn't getting the access, isn't getting the equality, isn't getting heard, isn't getting paid, isn't getting XYZ what we deserve based on those above us who are making decisions based on their privilege that negatively affect us. So I think we all know, and we all have the answers, because it's not hard. As a Black man, you would easily tell a white man, you need to be demanding I get paid equally as you. You need to be listening when I talk. You need to be doing XYZ. It's like, okay, apply those to anyone. That's how I need to be listening to trans women. That's how I need to be listening to people with disabilities. That's how I need to be listening to people who are experiencing a different financial situation than I am. So we all know what we need to be doing. It's just about whether we're willing to let go of our privilege and our comfortability in order to show up for the moment.
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. I guess the reason that I asked the question is I think I do believe in the value of hearing it from women, and hearing women tell us, hey, you already know what it is you need to do. It's like my mother used to tell me, when I would do something that to her I would have no business doing. She's like, you already know right from wrong. You know inherently what it is you're supposed to do.
It's a decision.
Yes, that's exactly what it comes down to. But yeah, I mean that's pretty much the same answer my wife told me too.
I'm so happy.
Yeah, shout out to my beautiful Black woman. She's like, bro, you know the answer to that, So she got on me as well.
Okay, good.
I welcome that. I want to be, again. I want to be intentional of challenging my privileges that I have, and I'll admit, that has been hard, because a lot of it I think comes down to me not really being aware of the privileges that I've been afforded. But as I become aware, I have to be intentional of breaking down, the systems that grant me these privileges. But it's a weird task sometimes, but nonetheless, it's part of the work for sure. Talk to me about the Loveland Group and the Loveland Foundation. Where did the idea come from? Why is it important to you? Like I love it, but tell people, and just talk to me a little bit about where it came from and why it's important to you.
Yeah, so the Loveland Group is my company umbrella name. So when you hear Loveland, when you think of Loveland, it could be a variety of ways that I show up in the world. I have my consultation agency, I have my bookstore, I have many upcoming projects. So Loveland is the space that I live in, and I have a very specific memory of being in my first Brooklyn room that I had rented in an apartment with 3 other people, and I was sitting there studying Oprah and studying Harpo. And I remember thinking, I was so blown away by the layers of Harpo. And I decided in that moment that I felt this like need to decide what my company name would be in the future, so that I would just know it and all I had to do was work for it. And I don't know what I was going through, and or what joy I had, and or why it was on my mind, but I decided Loveland, and I wrote it down in 2013. And so when we actually became a registered company, I decided to honor my younger self and stick with that name. Is it a name I would choose now? I don't know if it's what I would have chosen now, but I like the idea of honoring that version of me who had just moved to New York and was really dreaming of what was possible. And so Loveland is what my company's name is. But the Loveland Foundation in particular, which also, I named it the Loveland Foundation before I had even registered Loveland as a company, because I knew that I wanted my foundation to be associated with what my company would eventually be. So I decided to name it the Loveland Foundation when we incorporated that. And basically what we do at the Loveland Foundation is we provide access to mental health care for Black women and girls, particularly through the medium of therapy, talk therapy with a therapist. And we partner with listservs of Black therapists across the country who are able to connect with and be therapists to these Black women, girls, and non-binary, gender expansive people. And it has been an incredible experience. And it all started because I was at Columbia, and students got free mental health care with therapists there on campus. And so it was the first time I had ever had this ongoing access to a therapist. And I had walked out of a session one day. I was a nanny at the time. And I walked out of a session and I was heading to go get the little girl that I was nannying from school. And I just remember walking up 86th Street, like just so grateful for that therapy session I just had. And in my mind, I thought, I wish every Black woman could have a chance to have just this session I had today that really changed me in one way or another. And so I remember dropping the little girl off wherever I had to take her to, and I sat in a Starbucks coffee shop on Fifth Avenue, and I created a GoFundMe. And I said, this is called the therapy fund. I hope that I'm able to pay for some therapy sessions. I wanted it, I assumed it would be like I was doing a total Black market philanthropic attempt. Like I had no clue what I was doing. Like, no, I was just taking action. Like I had to do it right then and right there. No consultation, no asking anyone anything. Like I just made a GoFundMe that within 8 hours of thinking of the idea. And I ended up raising $10,000 within 24 hours. And and over 6 months, the first 6 months of continued fundraising, we ended up having $250,000, and I was able to bring on a full-time CEO, and I was able to incorporate it and continuing to do incredible partnerships with lots of wonderful people and brands who believe in the necessity of this. And so yeah, now we've offered over 20,000 hours of therapy to Black women and girls across the country. And it's been one of the things I'm most proud of, and one of the things I'm most excited about, because I know that Black women are the bedrock of so many aspects of Black existence: our families, our churches, our communities, our organizations, our grassroots. And so I rest well at night knowing that the healing that these Black women and girls are doing is absolutely rippling out into other aspects of the world that ultimately touches all of the Black community.
Yeah, that's so dope. That's very dope. What has been your own personal experience in therapy and just your own healing? What has been your experience?
Yeah, therapy has always been a very open conversation in my family. My mom my father passed away when I was 11, and my mom put me into therapy. I have two older sisters who struggle very much so with drug addiction and alcoholism, and I had to go through a lot of therapy in witnessing them. And in high school, I did a lot of therapy. When my mom couldn't, I remember my mom would put me into group therapy if she saw that I was kind of struggling, but she couldn't afford me to do my own session, so she'd asked if I could join group sessions. So therapy was always very natural to me. And I always found that I can remember being in group therapy and thinking, this is great. Like, I'm so happy for all of us right now. So I always had a positive connotation with it. And I think that probably led to my approach to this work, because it always felt natural to me. But especially getting older, therapy has been such a conversation amongst me and my friends, especially my Akron friends. Like I have so many girlfriends and guy friends from Akron who we've all moved out, lived all over the world, but usually when we're in the same city, we get together. And a lot of times it's like, I've been talking to my therapist about XYZ, and here's what I'm figuring out, and this is how it lends to my relationship or my next career move. And so therapy has also been very normalized in my friend group. And I guess what I hope for my own experience with therapy is that it lends to Black people recognizing and remembering and celebrating the fact that therapy isn't a last resort. It isn't the rock bottom place. It's a maintenance. It's a toolbox. It's an ongoing way. Yeah, it's an ongoing way to care for ourselves, to care for the people around. As I date, I ask very early in the dating process if people are in therapy. Like, I don't date people who are in therapy. I encourage all of my friends to be in therapy. Like, it's a very important part.
Currently in therapy?
I'm sorry?
I say you don't date people who are currently in therapy or who have not gone to therapy.
I don't date people who don't say, I'm going to go see my therapist. I see my therapist on Thursdays.
Got it.
Like, I need people who are constantly maintaining their mental health.
Yep.
And that's a part of it. And whether they can afford to go once a month, once a quarter, or I go once a week, but that's my own privilege of the money to pay for it. But there's value in any opportunity you have to have a non-bias, and I say that very loosely, but an outside voice, an outside lens giving you perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's beautiful. I'm a every 2 week person myself. I love it. I've been going to therapy the last few years. It is, and it's so, I think it's so powerful that you just spoke on going to therapy younger. You know, if I could look back on tell myself anything as a young person, man, I would have went to therapy way younger.
Yeah.
You know, I want, do you look at that? Do you look at going to therapy at such an early age? It has helped you so much in your latter years, in your adult years?
That's a good question. I don't remember those sessions, you know, like I don't remember. I can imagine that it helped me in that moment to talk through something and not just be crying about it all the time, or to be reassured or reaffirmed of something. I'd imagine that absolutely had an effect on me as an adult, but I hadn't considered that, but possibly. Yeah, but I think also just having a mother who put me into therapy probably states to, not even that my mom was the best listener or anything like that, but probably lends to the type of care that I had that maybe put me in a safer space in general.
Yeah, 100%. I think I can only remember one time as a kid where like, I grew up in a domestic violence household, and I remember my aunt asked me one time, "Hey, do you think you need to be in counseling?" And we're talking about like 2000. Like, I'm like, counseling? Hell no. But looking back on it, reflecting back on it, absolutely. You know, I could have benefited so much, you know, from that, you know, as a young person. So I wish I could have been able to start early. So I'm sure it's, you know, it benefited you. So that's cool. Listen, in your public address on Revolution, right after the George Floyd murders, you said something very powerful, and I would like you to expound on that, if you could. You said that racism is not a self-improvement work for the white community. Speak on that. Speak on what anti-racism is and why anti-racist is the only option that white people have.
Yeah, I mean, it's inspired by a quote by Angela Davis, where she says, it's not enough to just not be racist, you have to be actively anti-racist. And in my work, particularly addressing white women and being in conversation with white women about white women's complacency in a white supremacy that they often don't even include themselves in because they're so hyper-focused on patriarchy, there's this dismissal of a lot of the conversations around, you know, everyone saying, oh my gosh, white men are horrible. Okay, who's marrying them? Who's birthing them? Who's raising them? Like, they're not a separate entity, and there needs to be a reckoning with the white community as a whole instead of just assuming that it's white men. You know, me and my friends always talk about the ways that white women are the ones cooking the after KKK party snacks. And, you know, like they're not separate from this conversation. And the reason why I focus on that is because I'm particularly approaching this work critically in relationship with my feminism. So I have to be in conversation with white women. And if I have to, then I have to address race because it is who I am. It's part of my existence. So as I continue to teach and as I continue to see be in conversation with white women about this, I recognized that there was a lot of, Rachel, can you tell me 3 books I should be reading? Rachel, what are the 3 things I could be doing to be anti-racist? And how clickbaity a lot of articles were becoming around white feminism and around race, and recognizing how just how self-helpy it all felt. And I felt the need to make it clear to white people that anti-racism work is not here to benefit white people. It is not here to make you feel better about how you exist with your Black neighbor. It's not here to make you be able to rest better at night because you know that you read 3 books that Rachel Cargle suggested. And I also was seeing companies do it as well. Companies saying, you know, well, we had Rachel Cargle come and talk. So now I have companies sign NDAs. They cannot ever tell anyone that they cannot use me as a approach to claiming their integrity around race. And that's how serious I take. Like,
yeah, we had Rachel Cargle come in for our cultural training.
Yep. Nope. Yeah. I have NDAs signed across, even people who donate to the Loveland Foundation, big companies who donate to the Loveland Foundation, we put them on NDAs. You cannot tell anyone that you donated. You can talk about, we have them sign things that say they can talk about it in 3 to 5 years, that they were part of our growth. And I take very seriously this idea that whiteness does not get to be the oppressor and the savior. It does not get to be, you know, celebrated for undoing the harm that it did. And so that language of anti-racism work is not self-improvement work for white people. It's just a succinct reminder for white people to not approach this work in a way of consideration. How do I benefit from doing this work? Unless Black people aren't dying, unless Black children aren't in a preschool to prison pipeline, unless Black women aren't dying in hospitals at higher rates, unless, you know, we're getting loans at the same rate, then the anti-racism work has been successful. But you reading a book or liking my post or listening to a lecture does not cut it.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Do you look at yourself as a disruptor?
Yeah, I do. The language that I use a lot, because in my career, I like to push the limits of different industries. I really enjoy pushing the limits of different industries. So, you know, I've had big arguments with CEOs of hair companies about how they approach the race conversation. This week I walked in New York Fashion Week, and, you know, like that kind of pushed the limits. Like, am I allowed to be a scholar and am I allowed to model? I like to, you know, disrupting that space, making people think like, oh my gosh, Rachel, like, why is Rachel Cargle in this space? And what does that mean? And what conversations is she having? And so a lot of language that me and my team use is, I want people to hear me coming down the hallway. I want people to say, oh shit, Rachel now is talking about the nail polish industry and we need to get our shit together because she might be focusing on us. Oh shit, Rachel's talking about the pajama industry and why don't they go up to this size? We need to start guarding ourselves and doing the work in order to make sure that we are not, you know, a poster child for what's wrong or what needs to be fixed or what needs to be addressed in a various industry. So I hope that I'm a disruptor in the sense that people people question themselves on how they're showing up when they see that I've approached an industry.
When I listen to you speak, I hear so much freedom in the things that you talk about, the work that you do. And there is so much value and so much power that comes with freedom. Do you look at yourself as living a life where you have a certain amount of freedom?
Absolutely. My work is not just anti-racism work. My work is Black freedom work, and my first project is me. My first attempt at that is me. My realist, tangible space for that is me, and it allows me to show up in other spaces. So I worked really, really hard for the freedom I have, whether it's the financial freedom, whether it's the space freedom, whether it's the industry freedom. I was very strategic in my career, very strategic in various ways that I show up. And I don't take for granted the freedom that it has allowed me, for sure.
Can you talk to me about why you were so strategic and why the risk that you had to take? Like, why? Like, why was that so important for you to do those things? and like talk about like how that has benefited you today. Because again, the reason I ask that is because sometimes those can be buzzwords: financial freedom.
Oh yeah.
I have this freedom in my career. People hear that and they just think I got this pile of money and I'm just not doing anything. But the mental clarity that comes with like, listen, I don't give a damn about what you say. I'm going to say what I want to say. I'm going to show up in the way that I want to show up is very, very, very powerful and very, very valuable. Can you speak on that?
I think that me and my friends talk about freedom a lot. I recently ordered a banner, a huge banner to hang in my living room, and it reads, I won't need my freedom when I'm dead. And it's in the mail and I can't wait to hang it up. But this idea of, you know, it really came out of me and a lot of other Black feminist, womanist scholars who are my friends, and us sitting around and saying, wait, y'all, we're doing all of this work. We're working our ass off. We're risking our lives to do this work. Would we even know freedom if we saw it? Like, would we even know the liberation if it came? And me and and we have been having critical conversations that we will take our freedom now. Like, thank you very much. We're not going to wait until white people decide to act white. We're not going to wait until XYZ. I want to taste some of that here and now. So how does that show up for me? Me saying, you know, I don't really want to work with this big company, but I know that I'll be able to teach XYZ and they're going to give me this amount of money. So I'm going to take the job. I'm going to donate half of the money to the Loveland to you know, this thing. I'm going to tell them that if they want to bring me on, they also have to bring 2 of my friends on, and they can't tell anyone about it. So it's this boldness in saying, I'm going to be smarter and more strategic than the people in the industry while using the industry to benefit my community. And I think there's a group of us right now who are in the space of privilege to do that. And I think the reflection of that is showing all across social media, regular media, television shows, literature. It's showing up, this conversation of liberation, this conversation of freedom, this conversation of rest, this conversation of deservedness, of ease is showing up in Black communities. And it's starting to reflect in many, many ways, far past beyond what I'm doing in my space.
Yeah, that's powerful. You've mentioned that word a couple of different times, rest. And when I think of rest, I think I correlate that to freedom as well. The realization of rest, you know, when did you get that idea that, listen, that is very much important in my ability to be free as well?
Oh yeah, I learned there's an account on Instagram called the Nap Ministry, and the woman behind that is a academic genius who has done a lot of deep academic work on the idea, her name's Trisha, of rest within the revolution and rest within Blackness and Black people. And I've learned so much from her and her work. And it really showed up for me when I was considering how much I was draining myself for the hope of something that I wouldn't even be able to not benefit from, because we're all planting seeds now that will be grown and benefited from for generations. But like, I refuse to believe that I was put on this earth to survive whiteness. Basically, that's what I decided. I decided that I can fight it, but my whole life is not centered around surviving it. And that's when I was able to kind of shift my perspective on how I wanted to approach this work and how I wanted to stay in this space, but also I wanted to, you know, demand that this work isn't going to kill me. And I remember 3 years ago, the first time I ever put my Venmo on my page and said, you need to pay me for what I just wrote for you. Like that, people were saying, oh, this changed my life. This changed my life. You need to pay me for the arguments that I'm having with people that you're learning from. And I think I was one of the first activists to do that, to say, I deserve to be paid for what you're learning on this free app. And I remember, I remember the first day I did it, and I said, the language that I used against strategy and pushing the boundaries and looking at possibility, I posted an argument between me and this white woman that a bunch of people had been saying, oh, I learned so much from. And I said, great, if you learned so much, I'm so happy for you, but I am stressed from this, and you need to send me money for the bottle of wine that I'm goodbye tonight. That was the first language I used. And I called it, I said, if you want to contribute, I called it like my margarita fund. I said, if you want to contribute to my margarita fund, you can. And I think that I got about $600 in donations that day. And I was like, oh, people want to honor my work. People like want an opportunity to tangibly honor this very real energy exchange that's happening, even if it's on a free app. And it really made me question, like it reminded me, I do deserve to be paid for these hours of writing, this hour, this time of reading that pours into my knowledge to be able to teach these things, to be able to be in conversation. And as I continue to get the gift of language from other people that I'm learning from, it really is such a deep gift to be able to get language to have hard conversations, or the language to reckon with things within yourself. And so it was a lot of worthiness conversation within myself. Am I worth people donating to me? Am I so scared of money? Am I so scared of the conversation of money that I'm willing to struggle? Am I so scared that people, it's so funny now that I am in a much more successful space, and I'll post something and someone will say, oh my gosh, you're having this really expensive drink. And oh no, actually I have a very specific example where I heard through the grapevine, the world is nuts. Someone told me that someone was talking about me in a public space.
Okay.
And someone said, oh, don't mess with her. She's just, what did they say? They said she's just rich and self-absorbed. They said she's just rich and self-absorbed. Mm-hmm. And when I heard that, I was like, yes, I am both of those things. Yes, I absolutely have money, and I absolutely am in love with myself. Right. And if that makes you mad, that's a you issue. That's not a me issue. If the thought of me like existing in the world with the resources I need, and the thought of me overly loving myself offends you, then that's a you issue. That's not a me issue. So, and that also is like, I'm risking the social capital of people constantly equating activists with struggling, or artists with struggling. I'm willing and ready to push those boundaries for the sake of possibility. And now I always think like, damn, I wish Martin Luther King had a Venmo. I wish Malcolm X had a PayPal, because they would have and should have been millionaires. Yes. They should have had every convenience they needed to do the work that they were doing.
Can you imagine if the Panthers had the internet?
Can they get Patreon? It would be nuts. It would be nuts. And it would have been a much deserved situation. Yeah. And absolutely not equating myself to any of those entities, but remembering that people are out doing meaningful work. Yep. And we live in a world where we can shift our ideas of how we interact with it.
Yep. Listen, what we're talking about right now, we're ultimately talking about being disruptive to the system and living and existing outside of the system, which is bucking the status quo, mm-hmm. which is not what they want you to do, and you can become a danger, to the powers that be. Do you ever look at yourself and and become fearful of the work that you're doing? Because I mean, listen, you have been able to not only impact yourself, but impact hundreds of thousands and millions of people's lives. And you've been able to create this system for yourself to fund your own ecosystem. So you are literally saying, I don't need you. I have the data and the resources, the back why I don't need you. And I'm still going to talk my shit. That is powerful. Do you ever look at yourself and be like, okay, I have to move a little bit differently because this is dangerous work of what I'm doing?
I get death threats often. It's not even when I first moved back to Akron, the Akron Police Department was banging on my door within a week or so of me getting there, because I was talking about them more, and I don't trust them at all. And just a few weeks ago, I got a text to my phone saying that I would be next on the list to be killed out of several activists who had also been texted. They must have got some listserv of numbers of Black activists across the country. And so that's absolutely a reality for me. I've done lectures where people stand up and are yelling and screaming and walk out. I often need escorts to and from places that I'm going to teach for those types of reasons. And it's not any more of a risk than my contemporaries who are doing this work and other people who stand in these spaces. And it is something that I think about, but also I'm like living, like I'm in all ways. And I'm not scared of what could happen. Anything could happen at any time, whether it's a car crash, whether it's a freak accident, whether it's someone intentionally deciding to do what they need to do. So all I can do is continue to like go hard in career, in love, in rest, in fun, in, you know, in learning. And it's not something I fear, because because I have no control over it, but two, I left my mark, and if something was to happen, it'll happen. And I feel confident in how I've existed in the world so far.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It's like my granddad says, man, you can't, part of the fine print in this contract is if you come here, you got to leave here.
Yeah, yes, that's very true.
You know what I'm saying? But listen, I would argue what you just said, your worldview and your mindset on that. I would argue that is a product of being in therapy at an early age. Because what you just said at the end is so profound. You have no control over that, but you know, your mark is here. You know, so and your work is needed. You know, so it's such a beautiful thing to have you. You know, I speak for me when I say that I appreciate you. We appreciate you. What is your role in this revolution? If you consider today, the time that we're in, to be that, what do you consider your role to be?
A language giver. I give language for people to have meaningful conversations. I give language for people to understand themselves and their relations to each other. When I recognize that when I write, people come to me and say, I've been waiting for an opportunity to say that. I just didn't know how to say it. And so I think that I give language. And a thing that people have really, well, in this era and in this work, in this revolution, I would say language. Yeah, I'll stick with that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I like that. Listen, one of my last questions: why is it valuable for us as Black people to feel heard?
It's valuable for any human being to feel heard. And I think that it's particularly valuable for us in this moment, because being heard is how we remember we exist. Being heard is how we know that we're in community and in relation with each other. And I think that it's a release to be heard. You know, it's sitting in us. It's either on our hearts or in our stomach, in our guts, the things we want to say. It's resting on top of our skin. Like, I have to express my anger or my joy or my frustration or my confusion. And, you know, in relationships, communication is essential. Between teacher and student, communication is essential. So being heard really is just the opportunity to be in conversation with the rest of the world that we exist in. That's like breath, that's air to us, to be able to release and hear, which is like the inhale. That inhale and exhale of communication is essential.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, I wanted to get to your bookstore this week, but it's been a hectic week. I wasn't able to get there. But I'm definitely going. I'm going to go. I can't wait to get there. My wife and I have been trying to get out there for the longest. Listen, Rachel, thank you so much for this. This has been a wonderful conversation. We got to do this again. We got to do this in person. When I was talking to your team, I'm like, yo, I'll go through the necessary COVID protocols and make it happen. They was like, nah, she just got some stuff going on, you know. So I understood, but I definitely got to have you a guest again, and let's do this in person, man, because I believe that, you know, we have to continue to, you know, highlight and share, you know, to share what you have to offer, because you are a gem, and I appreciate you. You know, I do. I very, very much so. Before we get out of here, I got a few rapid questions that I want to ask you and run down. And then I get you out of here. We in a brand new year. What are your intentions for 2021?
Just to dig into the things that bring me joy. I'm taking cello lessons. I'm taking a Black playwright class online, just leaning, you know, my career growth has given me space to breathe a little bit. And so I'm kind of leaning into extracurriculars.
Okay. All right. what what is your purpose, and how does that connect it to what you are doing today?
My purpose is to push the boundaries of possibility, particularly as it pertains to freedom, and to model that for anyone else who's seeking that option.
What is something about you that people would be surprised to know? Look at that pause.
Like, what do I want to tell people about myself? Damn. I don't know. I guess the first thing that comes to my mind that has been a big conversation on social media and people are so interested to know is that I've been much more vocal about my bisexuality. And I think between my divorce and my dating rendezvous within New York City that I often share, it's been a very interesting conversation to be part of the queer community. And a lot of people are surprised or excited or interested or disappointed or whatever they are. And it's been an interesting touch point of conversation in a lot of spaces.
Okay. All right. What scares you?
White people. It's literally the first and truest thing to come to mind. That really is where so much of my fear rests.
Yeah. No, for sure. I get it. I get it wholeheartedly. What is your favorite quote?
I have so many. Everything Zora Neale Hurston ever said, everything Angela Davis ever said, everything Nikki Giovanni ever said.
Give me one, Rachel. Give me one.
Yeah, I have so many things swimming in my mind. Okay, so I'm thinking of this quote from Zora Neale Hurston where she said, I love myself when I am laughing, and I love myself when I am, did she say serious? Yeah, I love myself when I am serious. And I think maybe, I don't know why my brain isn't giving it to me, but basically I love the way that she was self-absorbed in the way that I've been known to be, that she can absolutely enjoy every aspect of her life, whether it is one based in goodness or not.
What is the best advice you ever received?
That it wasn't necessarily advice, but it was affirmation that changed me, that my curiosity was the most interesting thing about me. And I really leaned into cultivating my curiosity because of that thing being said to me, which changed my career.
Yeah, that's a good one. If you could pick up the phone and call your 20-year-old self, knowing what you know today, what would you tell yourself?
Bitch. It's about to get so good. Yeah. I would say that, but also, I get asked that a lot, and I would want to hear from her. Like, I would want her to tell me something. Like, tell me how you're maintaining this energy. Tell me how you're doing this. Tell me how you're finding, because even my fearlessness, I think I've lost some of it a little bit. Like, I don't have anything to say to her. I want her to remind me of myself, really.
That's a good one. Yeah, that's good. Listen, tell everybody what you got coming up, where they can find you, your social media tags and all that good stuff. Tell people what you got coming up.
I gloriously have nothing coming up. I'm so happy to not be doing it today. My book will be coming out either end of this year or next year. So that will be fun. Head over. I guess this is an Akron space. So what I have coming up is the bookstore. And also we have the bookstore, but also we have a writing center. So people who are interested in writing, we do writing workshops with local Akron people, which is really dope because usually, my global audience signs up. So Akron's getting a lot of shine in the literary space right now because we bring in local writers to do workshops with people around the world. So come be a part of our workshop, stop by the bookstore. The staff we have is really great. And just on social media, Rachel.Cargle, that's me.
In all seriousness though, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
I appreciate your time. I don't take it lightly at all. We gotta protect, Miss Rachel Cargle, and continue to share what she has going. Especially here in the city of Akron, man. We have a star, right here under our nose.
We have so many in Akron.
We do for sure. We have a lot of good people coming out of the city. But
yeah, and I live in Akron part-time now, so if you see me around, You guys might see me around in Akron.
I'll pull you aside, holler at you. But nonetheless, thank you so much again, man. Everybody, thank you so much for all the continued support, the genuine support. I really appreciate it. Another episode of Live Your Purpose podcast. We are out.